I've been using Cakewalk by Bandlab for a while now, and I think it is almost the best free DAW. I use the word almost in there because I do have some problems while using Cakewalk, which I'll list in this video. The idea of this video might sound negative, but I'm doing this because I do want Cakewalk to be improved. To point out my first problem with Cakewalk, I will have to take you to a different DAW. Here we are in Ableton Live Lite with a single MIDI track holding 3 different MIDI clips. In order to edit the MIDI, we have to double click on the MIDI clip to bring up the MIDI editor. This brings up the MIDI data that is present only in that single MIDI clip. If we have to edit the MIDI in the other MIDI clips, then we do have to select those MIDI clips to bring their respective MIDI data inside the MIDI editor. Alright, now I'm going to take you to the DAW of our discussion, Cakewalk. What you're seeing is a project that I worked on recently, and here we have the MIDI track for the drums holding 17 individual MIDI clips. And if I open one of them, it brings up the entire MIDI data in that single track. For a producer who relies on VST instrument plugins, this is a huge inconvenience. Clicking on the clip does show its content selected in the piano roll, but once we click somewhere in the piano roll, that selection's gone. One could argue that this feature, or the lack of it, is to show the entire timeline so that we can switch between the MIDI tracks without having to exit the piano roll. Well, let me take you to another DAW. This is Traction Waveform Free, in which I have added one MIDI track holding 2 different MIDI clips. Now if I open the MIDI editor, it only brings up the MIDI data of the selected MIDI clips. Right now it's showing the content of both the clips because both of them are selected. If I had only selected one of the clips, then the MIDI editor will only show the content of that single MIDI clip. And the timeline is very much like that of Cakewalk, stretching across the entire project, not just the MIDI clip like in Ableton. And there is this additional feature with which we can identify where the MIDI clip is in the timeline along with its length. You see this red color here? It represents the MIDI clip and its length. The funny thing is, this does actually exist in Cakewalk. Well, kinda. To get something similar in Cakewalk, we have to go to the view menu of piano roll and enable this show clip outlines. This will darken the piano roll wherever there is a MIDI clip, making it impossible to differentiate between 2 different MIDI clips that are adjacent to each other. And the color difference between the MIDI clip area and the no MIDI clip area is pretty much negligible, which makes this whole feature useless. So in situations where I desperately need to isolate MIDI data in piano roll, this is what I do. Go to View and enable this Hide Muted Clips option. Now I can select the clips that are adjacent to the clip that I want to edit and mute them by pressing K on the keyboard. Now we are seeing only the MIDI data that we actually want to see. And after making necessary edits, we will have to select those clips again to unmute them by pressing K, which does not necessarily improve the speed of the workflow, but it does help in avoiding unnecessary confusion. That's it with the problems related with MIDI clips. Now, problem number 2, automation. For starters, the automation in Cakewalk is primitive. It takes a few more steps to get things done compared to other DAWs. But it's okay, I'm willing to go through those. But the inconsistencies really concern me. Now I'm gonna show you some of the things that I have faced with automation that are more than just these kind of inconsistencies. This is my last project, Cyberpunk, in which I have this pitch riser, which I made by automating the pitch bend of T-Force Alpha Plus. So the pitch of this track is supposed to go up with respect to this automation lane, and see what happens. I toggled the automation read enable to see if that was a problem, but it still didn't fix it. And that is when I realized I should check the other tracks in this project with automation, like this one with a volume automation which didn't get baked into the track on freezing the synth, as you can see from the size of the wave. So I was forced to restart Cakewalk and freeze the tracks again to fix it. And here is the pitch riser after the restart. Here's the next problem with automation. This is the drum bus of the same project. If I had more percussion sounds in there, which leads to the very beginning of the drop, then I would have been forced to move the notes to the line where the drop starts. And it sounds fine during the playback. But there have been situations where in the final output file, the automation sounded like it was a bit late, like this. Does it matter? Well, listen to it with the other sounds. And it is supposed to sound like this. I've had to export many of my projects multiple times to get this kind of timing right. Moving on to the next issue with automation. Let me take you to Traction Waveform Free to show you how it is supposed to sound. I have Vital in here with init patch playing a simple chord stack. Nothing fancy, right? I added TDR Nova effect on the track and automated the low pass filter cutoff. I gotta say, these controls for automating are pretty great. I replicated the same thing in Cakewalk. Well, almost the same, because the automation in Cakewalk is limited to 4 different types. But it doesn't matter. Just listen to this. Now that is a nightmare for anyone who uses automation a lot like me. I picked this scenario because I thought this was an easier way to understand what the problem with automation is. What I mean to say is, this kind of reproduction involving automation is not exclusive to TDR Nova. Right, the next issue that I want to talk about is related to the exporting of a project. So let me lay down a situation. Here I have a project. Each of these tracks are directed to buses. There is a drum bus for the drums, guitar bus for the guitar tracks, bass bus for the bass tracks, and so on and so forth. The last 4 buses are further directed to the sidechain buses. The effects, including the pro channel effects and the level of the volume faders, play a very important role in keeping the level of the final output in the master at where it is supposed to be. I managed to keep the level under -6 dB, which is the recommended level for uploading to a beat selling platform like BeatStars. Then I can go to Export, click on Advanced to bring up this window. Now BeatStars asks only for stems, but since I do want the buyer of this beat to have the full potential to create the best mix possible after adding their own vocals, I prefer to upload track outputs to BeatStars instead of combining the tracks to stems, and that is why this option is selected here. And when we click Export, it's going to create audio files for each of these tracks in the project which is selected here, and none of those files will be influenced by the effects or the volume fader levels of the bus tracks, even if we enable these 3 options related to the bus tracks. Why? Because the track outs are taken directly from the track before it reaches any bus, including the master bus. And if our buyer is going to use those tracks, their project is going to have a higher volume level than what it is better to work with. And that is going to give us a bad reputation. Why are these 3 options available here when we select the source category to be tracks? Shouldn't they be grayed out or unable to be clicked? Right now, it's kind of misleading. And that is the last of the 3 serious problems I have with Cakewalk. And if the developers of Cakewalk ends up fixing these, it will end up as the best free DAW. I'll be sending the link of this video to the social handles of Bandlab, hoping they will look into these issues. So if you want to point out anything that needs improvement in Cakewalk, then do comment it down below. They might read it. And that's it for this video. This is ADK, hoping to see you in the next video. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, peace out.